Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, your weekly developer podcast. I'm James Montemagno, and today is not Frank Krueger with me, but my good friend, Mr. Jon Galloway. How's it going, John?
Hello.
Yeah.
It's going great.
John, this is a podcast that Frank and I have done for about 18 years. And we don't have very many guests, but Frank goes to me tonight. So I sent you a link in Teams, and then you are here, and you don't know what you're doing, do you?
No,
No.
I do not.
So I do a podcast. I don't know if you know about development with Frank every single week. And you've done a podcast for a long time, I believe, where you heard code.
I have done a podcast. I do have, real quick, I want to check the audio level for me is looking really low. So I want to verify it's actually happening.
Sounds fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds great.
Yeah, herding code. It's funny. We got up to, I think, 247 episodes. And I was like, oh, we should have pushed 3 more. Just, like season finale.
I always tell Frank, we just got to keep going. We're so close to 500. We can do it. And then it's like, when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's literally over a year and a half away. So it's like not very close at all when you do 1 week. So this podcast is mostly audio, but we also have a YouTube channel. So that is why I can see you and you can see me and we're looking at each other. But mostly people can't see us unless you go to youtube.com/@mergeconflictfm and then boom, that's us.
Nice.
So I will figure, people know Jon Galloway is very popular on the internet. He's got a lot of followers. He's a person on the internet. And what I wanted to kind of do, if you're cool with it, because I said you got 30 minutes and you said, sure. And you ran to your office.
I did. I just finished dinner.
Oh, perfect. Me too.
Yeah.
What'd you have? What'd you have for dinner?
Oh, I had, so I'm not going to pronounce it right. I think it's radicchio salad.
Radicchio? Yeah, I think that's how you say it.
So when I tried saying that to, like, I've been using Gemini lately, Google Gemini or Copilot, and I'll use it with voice. And I was like, help me, like I'll like brainstorm like things to add to a salad. I'm like, help me with this radicchio salad. And it's like, for your ridiculous salad, I recommend bananas and like all this silly stuff. So the long story, since you asked, is I was listening to a cooking podcast and I heard about the Rancho Gordo Bean Club. And
what is that?
It's a whole thing. So they're organic heirloom beans.
Okay.
And apparently this guy like started doing them and he sold them at a farmer's market and it got so popular that like now there was a 6-month waiting list, all this stuff. So anyways, I'm like, whatever, I'll sign up on this waiting list. And then it pinged me and my wife's like, well, you got to do it now. So then we got this like beautiful box of dried beans and so we were like, what do we do with these beans now? And so we made a radicchio salad and it was so good.
That's awesome.
It was accidentally vegan.
That's pretty cool. I like that. We had a salad as well tonight. I made a salad. We had a little bit of romaine sitting around. I made a small salad, and then we just had like a home chef pizza from Fred Meyer. So we just like threw that in. It was sort of a we're in the middle of Love is Blind. We're almost done with that right now. But usually when it's like bachelor night, which is usually like bachelorette night Tuesdays, we usually just throw a pizza in, good to go. But funnily enough, talking about what you're talking about with like this like kind of rare exclusive produce, do you know about blue bananas?
No.
Oh, so like you can buy apparently blue bananas. You can Google this with Bing. And blue bananas are like a banana. They're a type of banana. They're Java bananas.
Wow.
And they're blue bananas, and you can get them and you can order them, but they're pretty exclusive and hard to get because, like bananas, almost everything is a single type of banana that's mass produced, which means if bananas, which have in the past been hit with a strain of, infestations or whatever, or disease, they get wiped out and then they have to create a new part of banana. But the blue Java bananas you can get, and apparently you can order them. They're very expensive, but I hear they're delicious according to the internet. And I would love to get my hands on some blue bananas.
I was all ready for like, and how did they taste? And it's like there's a cliffhanger. Stay tuned.
But if you YouTube on the YouTube, then you can look up blue banana reviews, and I believe they're like very good. They're sweeter, I think, in general.
Yeah.
I just love bananas. Okay. Jon Galloway is your name, and you've not only been under the water on a submarine for long periods of time, you've also won The Price is Right. and you currently work at Microsoft on the DevDiv community team, which is the
Yep.
team, my team. Um, and you've been in and around the world of web development, specifically with ASP.NET and now ASP.NET Core for decades. And that, to me, in a nutshell, sounds like an interesting journey. Jon, why, where, how? How did you get here
Oh
today? That's
wow.
what I want to know.
Okay. Well, I mean, going way back, I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do when I was, in high school. Like I was interested in math, science, English. I liked music, all kinds of stuff, right?
Were you like a math kid? Like, because I was a math. I just loved math. It's my favorite subject, as you know, because you're on my team. I
Yes.
am terrible at English and grammar. It's just like the worst. But like math is like my jam. Like, were you a math kid, or were you just like, it's okay?
I actually did like math and I did like summer school to do like extra math and all
Oh,
this
okay.
stuff. And then, but then, so I got four brothers and we're all kind of like, my parents are like, kind of good luck with college and, see what you can get, And so my older brother read a book about somebody that went to West Point and was like, hey, these service academies seem cool. And he went to the Naval Academy.
Okay.
And so then I was kind of like, well, all right, I guess I'll do that. I applied different places. I was going to go to UCSD as a backup. Anyways, went to the Naval Academy. And then part of the deal with that is you get out and you have 5 years after that and that you owe of service. And I
Okay. So
studied
you
physics.
you go the naval. Okay, break this down. I don't know anything about our military or naval anything at all. So you go and you're like, hey, this academy, it's a university. You go to university, they like cover it, but then you got to serve. Kind of like if you're like my sister's a nurse, right? And like they would like, hey, like we'll send you to do some stuff. But you got to come work for us for a certain amount of years. Similar thing. Is that
Exactly the
okay?
same. Yep.
Got it. I'm on the same page. Perfect.
Yep.
And
And
you're
it totally,
this is somewhere in California that
no,
happened.
it's in Annapolis, Maryland.
Oh, you lived in that's on the other side of the
It
world
totally is. That
of
was
America.
basically almost the first times that I'd left home. Like I basically
Wow.
had barely been out of California.
Wow.
My first flight was to Annapolis, and like, so, so yeah, the deal is you go there for 4 years, and it's full military school. You wear uniforms all the time. You
Mm.
march. You have inspections and parades and all this stuff. I studied physics while I was there. Then I went to nuclear power school and submarine school and stuff, and was on submarines for 5 years.
Okay. So you're in the school now. Do you because if you're in the naval school, like, do you
Hmm.
get to decide? Is it just like, oh, like there's a lot of different ships
Yeah,
that are out there? Like I think when people think of the Navy, I often think of the thing where the planes land on the battle
aircraft
cruisers.
carriers. Yep.
Yeah, yep. The Death Star just boom cruise in on there, and the star cruisers, and like that's what I think of. But you were like, you know what I want to be underwater for months at a time.
Yep. I
So
know.
why?
Honestly.
What was the rationale? Like, did you do research? Was there like, hey, you got three options. You can be above ground. You can be on the ground, like doing I don't know radar. You can be on the
Right.
water, or you can be under the water. And you're like, you know what sounds cool? Under the sea.
Yeah. So they have a variety of different things you can do. And it's actually changed since I graduated.
Oh,
Because now they've added on like cyber warfare as a specialty and stuff.
wow.
But yeah, but while I was there, you could basically be surface ships, which are your standard ships. You could do aviation. You could do like if you were like disqualified medically, you could do supply corps,
Hmm.
which is kind of more like logistics and stuff. Then there's also like medical corps and some things where you have to like specifically get into. Um, and then there were a few like nuclear power options. One was aircraft carriers, and the other was submarines.
Oh, cool. So
And
did you have to like, when you say nuclear, you mean like nuclear fusion, like nuclear power plants, or
nuclear
is it?
powered.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So part of the deal way back then, I was way into physics and stuff. That was my major. I
Wow.
thought going to nuclear power was interesting. There was a small pay increase, like you actually got paid a little bit more. Um, and then I don't know, just submarines sounded like, wow, that's crazy. And you actually do like you travel. So there's two different kinds of submarines. There's the missile subs, which just go and disappear for 6 months. And
Mm.
they're basically like, if there's a nuclear war, they pop up and shoot missiles.
Got it.
Then there's also attack subs, which was what I was on. You'll hear them like back then they were the Los Angeles class and stuff. And their
Wow.
job is to mostly protect aircraft carriers and surface ships, and then also to be able to attack enemy ships.
Okay.
Um,
When I play, okay, two things really quick. One, mid podcast correction, Price is Right, not Wheel of Fortune.
that's
And
true.
then two, I just been we watched a lot of Wheel of Fortune before The Bachelorette, so it's like what happens. But anyways, Price is Right, winner of all the showcase showdown,
The showcase
um,
showed.
double winner. And two, so when I play Advance Wars, which is one of my favorite turn-based games, the submarines basically do just that. So I kind of understand exactly what you're saying. They have the ability in the game to be like above water and then below water. And then below
Mhm.
water, they're like in stealth mode and they use more fuel. This is obviously a fictitious game
Yeah.
from intelligent systems, which is fantastic. But that is kind of what they're doing, right? Because they are guarding the ships, but they can be stealthy and they can be in attack mode.
Yeah. So
Gotcha.
that sounds like a mix kind of between during World War II and earlier, they were diesel powered.
Mm,
And they spent a lot of the time, they were basically surface ships that could go underwater for a period of time.
okay.
And the way those work is diesel engines charge a battery and then they can go down underwater. A lot of the world's submarines are like that because building a nuclear powered submarine is really hard. Like running a nuclear plant underwater
Yeah.
away from any kind of resupply and all that is really hard to do. um Shielding, like making it safe for people to be you know 20-30 feet from a nuclear reactor underwater,
Wow.
is hard.
That's crazy.
So but what's amazing with those is they basically don't need to be refueled for 20-30 years, and so they're not limited. Yeah, they're not limited. They're limited basically by needing to pop up and get some recirculate air,
Yeah.
get some food. Like they can make their own water. They can basically purify the air for the most part. So um, so they are not limited by fuel, and they are when they can go deep enough, they're basically undetectable. Like
Wow.
when I was getting close to getting out of the Navy, we did a operation like a war
This is
game exercise.
don't say anything classified, John. I know you signed NDAs, I'm sure, with the government. I don't know what's classified, what's not classified.
That is true. Okay, so we do this all the time where you do like these war games, right? And so
Yeah.
we were basically an enemy sub,
Mm,
and the captain was like, Galloway, have fun, see you in 6 hours. Like basically I was under supervision, but I had qualified on all the stuff. And like if anything, warning things came up, I would wake up the captain. But basically it was like just have fun. So I was kind of like, all right, I'm going to go sink that ship. All right, I'm going to go sink that ship. And you basically, like, submarines are undetectable to surface ships. I think it's gotten a little better now with AI and some kind of more advanced processing, but it's super hard to detect a submarine underwater. So yeah. So and while I was in, we did 2 Western Pacific deployments. So I got to go to Singapore, Japan, Bahrain, Hong Kong, like Korea. So that was
yeah.
cool.
That's
And that's part
cool.
of where I got my like interest in travel. I love travel. So, but anyhow, so I got like getting back to the question of how did I get where I am today? So I'm like getting out of, well, I was getting to the end of 5 years where you got to decide if you're going to make it a career kind of or not,
So did you spend 5 full years straight underwater?
No, I spent 1.5 years doing all the school stuff. So
Okay.
I did 4 years of college, graduated with a degree, and then a Bachelor of Science in Physics. But then I had to go through submarine school, submarine prototype, which was another 6 months where you actually qualify as an operator in a nuclear plant, which was
Mm,
super hard.
wow.
And then 3 months of just submarine school, which is like, how do you sink a ship with torpedoes? How do you escape? How do you keep safe? What do you do if there's flooding? Like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So the idea with that is so that when you get to the submarine, you're actually useful, because they have very limited space. So they don't want somebody, don't want to be dragging someone around for a year and a half while they kind of learn how to be useful at all. So pretty much by the time you show up after a year and a half of school, you're like actually able to do some kind of junior officer jobs.
Gotcha.
So
So when you got on, so what was your, are you allowed to, what was your position? Are you allowed to say that? Like, were
yeah,
you
yeah.
Did you
So
navigate radar? Did you load torpedoes, or
right.
were you in the engine room
Okay.
next to the
So
nuclear power?
yeah. So a junior. So in the Navy, in the military, you've got mostly the division is like you have officers and enlisted. So the enlisted are the folks that are actually turning the valves, pushing the buttons and stuff, and then the officers and they go from like, in the Navy you've got like your seaman apprentice, all this stuff moving up into like petty officers and then chiefs. And the chiefs are people that have been on for, you know 10, 15 years, and they know everything. They know like how to take a piece of equipment apart, or if something goes wrong, how to bang it with a wrench and make it work,
The
that
Scott
kind of stuff.
Hanselman of submarines is what you're saying.
Well, yes, but you know how like with Microsoft, we've got engineers and PMs.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with the military, where you've
Hmm.
got enlisted are the people actually pushing, turning, doing, and then the officers are the people being like, hey, this maintenance is due next month. Let's schedule this, that kind of
Oh,
stuff. Right.
got it. Okay.
And then, so that's one thing is the officers have like low key managerial up through the captain is like an officer and he's like in charge. He's the CEO of the sub. Right.
Got it.
And then you've got the junior officers are kind of more, like they hear from their department heads what needs to get done, and they kind of like run this basically spreadsheets and stuff.
It's like a
But they
company.
also,
It's like a company on
it totally is
on
like
a
a company.
submarine. It's wild.
But then so you have two kind of jobs. You've got your management kind of jobs, and you've also got um, your watch standing jobs. And there's two things you do as a junior submarine officer. One is you first qualify as the engineering officer of the watch, which is where you're on for 6 hours and you're basically like supervising the nuclear plant. So I'm like
Yeah.
barely, in my 20s, and I'm like supervising $1 billion nuclear plant, and you have all kinds of like guidance, and you've got a whole watch standing team where you've got an electrical operator whose whole job is to know operating electronic gear or electrical
Yeah.
gear, right? You've got a
Yeah.
reactor operator who's like a technician on the reactor plant, right? So you've got really skilled technicians, and then your job is to kind of coordinate them.
Yeah.
And then your job is also to learn what happens if there's a steam leak, what to, all the shots to call, and when to call the captain, when to wake the captain up, what to tell the officer of the day. So that's your one job is first qualifying the engine room, and your next job is to qualify officer of the deck, and that's basically like 6 hour mini captain. So your job then is you're in the front of the ship driving the ship.
Mm, okay.
So the captain says, hey, we need to be in Singapore, in 3 days. And then the navigator draws out the track, and then you start your 6 hour watch and you go, we're here. Oh, looks like we're a little ahead of schedule. Chief of the boat, I'm going to do this. What time do we need to empty trash? Okay, we need to go up and get our radio broadcast at this time, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's basically, and then over time so I got out at the end of the junior officer thing. After that, you become a department head, which is where you're like the navigator or the weapons officer or stuff. So during my time as a junior officer, I spent a stint as reactor division officer, as torpedo division officer, as fire control division officer, and as radio division officer. So you rotate through.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So
Okay. So you're in this for those years, and then they're like, okay, you get to stay, or you can just
that's it.
now you're done. You're off into the world.
Yeah. So basically, your obligation's done, and then you can say, "Do you want to sign up for 3-ish more years, and we'll send you to more school, and you'll do
Mm.
some more stuff."
So did you get, you know, I'm not like we don't talk about war often in here, but like during your time, was there active conflict, or was it sort of like did you kind of get into a period where there was peace in the world and you're able to kind
Yeah.
of navigate around? Was it ever like really scary? I mean, it sounds scary to be underwater in general. I'm not a big fan of getting in water to begin with. So
It was actually a pretty decent time to be in the military, in the U.S. military. It was between the two Persian Gulf Wars.
mm,
Um, we were still and this was our like Cold War with Russia was winding down. We were keeping an eye on the Middle East as things were ramping up. And after the first Persian Gulf War, um, there was one operation we were in where they basically like we were keeping an eye on Iraq, and they like our submarine was part of a thing where they launched a few cruise missiles to basically like Iraq was targeting U.S. planes that were flying over, and
Whoa.
we blew up a few like essentially they were either unoccupied or almost completely unoccupied like air for or air missile bases, but it was
Wow.
basically a hey knock it off kind of thing.
Wow. Crazy. Wow.
So that was about it. And then we did play a little bit of sub versus sub, and we like we're off the coast of some other countries, like kind of watching, just keeping an eye on things. But for
Hmm.
the most part, it was pretty low key.
Okay. So you decide I'm sick of being under the
Yeah,
water and it's time to reemerge and reinvent yourself, or like, or was it, or like,
basically.
basically, okay.
Yeah. So it was like, do you want to be a nuclear or a naval officer for the next several years, or like that was a great time to make a transition. And I had always loved computers. I like going back to I'm old enough that I had to actually stay after school to be able to use a computer
The
when I was
teletyping in,
in.
are you like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So I love computers, and I was on board. I was always like learning how to program their Unix systems and just whatever.
punch
So I
cards, yep,
Yep. It was a step ahead of punch cards, but not
okay,
much.
guy.
So I got out and I took some time off and read some books and basically learned enough about Visual Basic to get
Oh,
a job in as a VB programmer.
oh,
Um,
VB6, VB, what was the first VB?
it was mostly VB6. We're
Yeah,
using
classic.
VB3 through 6. So
Ooh, nice.
some of the legacy stuff we were doing was VB3, but yeah. Um, doing desktop apps for things like environmental remediation and IoT and um, check-in stuff. Like when you go to a conference and get a badge, and they print out a badge,
Yeah.
something like that.
So
So
you get out and you're like, I like computers. I'm gonna read some books,
yeah,
and then you're just like, okay, I, I'm into this. You stumble across VB
yeah,
classic, and you're like, now I'm gonna become a developer, I
yeah,
assume. And like,
yep,
was it just that you like went on like monster.com and you're just like, oh, VB jobs, or like, what was that journey like? I mean, you just
yeah. It's
transitioned
funny.
very quick
Okay,
into becoming a professional developer, John, but like, like this sounds like this is a transition moment that seemed
right.
pretty cool.
Okay, so first of all, I got out and I'm reading books on C++ and Java because I was like, that's what I'd heard of.
Yeah.
I'd never taken a computer class. I'd never done any like programming stuff. I just liked for fun playing on computers. I'd always kind of done some low key programming, but it was like all self taught stuff. So then my brother was a teacher at a school, and he had a friend, I think that was a like part time teacher, but was like, hey, you got to tell your brother to check out this VB stuff. It's really cool. You can do all these, whatever. So I learned enough VB to be like apply for a job. And then I actually got one of
Enough
those.
VB just to be a little dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I got the local computer paper. This was actually a little free newspaper thing. Flipped through the back and just cold called people. And I'm like, hey, like to get a job, And I called this place up, and the guy's like, I don't really need anybody, but if you want to come in, feel free. I'll be working Saturday. So I came in on Saturday, and I like answered enough questions. He's like, look, I'll pay you minimum wage. It's basically an intern job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see how it goes. And I like really got into it, and he like brought me on full time and like promoted me several times. And like I remember one time we got offered a job that was C++. It was like a C++ Windows desktop app, and I was like, I think we should do it. We bid on the job, and then my boss is like, we're too busy. I was like, I tell you what, let me like do this small part of it, and if it goes okay, we'll take the full job. And we did anyhow, so that was fun. But that was my first. That was actually, again, to date myself, that was I ran across Y2K bugs in the code,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was in C++, so it actually would have like full on crashed the program. I'm like, hey, I think this is a problem here. So
I think
so
we're
I
gonna
did
need
that, and then
2 digits. I'm just saying. I know if it goes over this. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
That's
Well,
cool.
there was 2-digit years, and it was things that were like basically like 2-digit things. So, and then after that, I had a friend from high school, and he was like, "Hey, I'm working at this company doing all this web stuff. it's internet, So I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So then I moved over there, and it was classic ASP and
Hmm.
VB COM objects,
Okay. Is this before .NET even? Like was,
before .NET.
before .NET
Yeah.
even came out? So like, okay, that makes sense. So you were doing desktop apps because that's the world I live in, mostly desktop and mobile, right? As Frank and everybody knows on the podcast.
Yeah.
Was that transition seamless for you? Because I don't really understand how the internet works, and my wife had to explain to me when I click a button how it actually works. So she's a web developer, right? So like she
Mhm.
explains how the internet works, and it blows my mind. I don't understand it because that transition was hard. Like I think when I moved from like WinForms to WPF and like the MVVM transitions, like it like just clicked super well for me, right? And the mobile
Yeah.
transition, good. Like I got it. When it comes to web, I'm just like, I don't understand anything, right? I barely understand RESTful service calls. So like, how was
Yeah.
that transition? Or was it just like you were in such a knowledge like soaking mode that you're just like, I'm going to, I got this.
It was both. So partly I was like, honestly, it was so much easier and more fun than being a submarine officer. I was like, they pay you to do this. This is awesome. And then also, back then, VB6 had a web. They were called web. Oh shoot, I forget. The VB6 had a web desktop thing, web forms
Mm.
sort of thing. And then when I started on .NET, like as .NET was coming up, they also had web forms. And so it was actually kind of an easier transition to go from desktop to web back then
Oh, okay.
because you're dragging controls on, click events, all that stuff, right? And I feel like it's gotten harder over time now, right? To jump into any of this stuff where you actually have to read source code. This was a lot more like, oh, I can see this. I double click on this. Now something happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. More like kind of like more like mobile and desktop development then. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So that was part of it. And then also, while I was working at my desktop app job, I had a family friend that was like, hey, we need a website. Can you help us with it? And I was like, maybe. And I like kind of, you know, sort of made them a sort of website. It was classic ASP with a access database backend. And then
Classic.
once I did that, then we did a little more web work at my VB job. So anyhow, it was kind of a slow kind of learning thing.
Yeah.
And then I had the company I was working at was all web stuff all the time, and so I really was kind of had a lot of people to learn from. And I worked with several people along the way that really got into like semantic HTML and like really learning, like the fundamentals. And so
Yeah.
some of it is kind of like it's contagious when you're learning from other people that are like deep into this, and really love it. So back then, like I read books on there's a like CSS Zen Garden, and there were like some really like, and it was a lot easier in some ways. Like there was less to the web back then. Like HTML and server side, you weren't doing there was not so much like JavaScript framework. There were no JavaScript frameworks. There weren't all these CSS like frameworks. It was a lot more stripped down.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to harken back to like when I got into mobile dev, and like Frank will contest to it, is, when him and I started, there was one iPhone in one size. Like it was I think it was like 480 by 320 or whatever. And you were, and there was nib files, the XIB files, and you were creating user interfaces to a very specific dimension. So you knew
Yeah.
exactly where your buttons were going to be. You were exactly this, and it scaled no matter what. The only thing maybe you had to worry about was rotation, right? And there
Mm.
were APIs for that because you were docking things and it would just
Yeah.
automatically rotate. Or you just say, "I'll just make it only portrait mode because it's a phone, anyways." But nowadays, right, there's like a bajillion frameworks in iOS and Android, and then there's a bajillion different, screen resolutions and different types of devices that your
Yeah.
apps can run on.
I struggle with that now. Like I'm part of a military mentoring program at Microsoft. And when I'm talking to people that are just learning coding and they ask questions, I'm like, I have to think a lot more because back then it was like, you want to learn web dev? There's like three or four things you can write your backend in. You got Java and some kind of CGI, and you've got Cold Fusion and ASP, classic ASP, and that's it. I mean, not too
Yeah,
many things. Perl,
Ajax, yeah,
yeah,
Perl, little
yeah,
PHP.
and but you're basically just pumping. You're just writing strings out to the browser, and then what's coming, and then you have to know how to handle a forum post and you're good, you know.
Yeah.
And so then over time, I slowly was able to learn like, oh, here's some more CSS stuff. Now here's the beginning of a JavaScript framework. You know, here's jQuery. Here's, you know, and so it was, and then browsers kept adding more features on. Like, this is mind blowing that we are recording this in a web browser, right? We're doing
Yeah.
live video. I'm seeing the audio web form scroll across the bottom. Like, if you told me this was possible on the web back then, I would, you know, like, it just, you couldn't do this in a desktop app, you know. So, yeah.
That's cool. All right. So this is the era. So you get here, and then .NET emerges, and like you were an ASP developer. So
Mhm.
I actually don't really know the transition from ASP to ASP.NET, by the way. Like because I don't know anything about the web very much. I just pretend like I do. So people think I know anything. I don't know anything about the internet. So were you in and around like the Microsoft ethos? Were you going to conferences? Were you
Yeah.
engaged in like AS, I guess ASP.NET, the website came out, I assume. And like, were you in and around like the community a lot, or were you sort of just in kind of like your little work bubble?
Yeah,
Because,
I was mostly in my work bubble. You know, like, it was definitely just learning from coworkers. I started going to the local user groups,
oh,
and that was a great way to kind of learn. Back then, you know, like, wasn't as much on the internet. You couldn't self learn as much there, so it was going to the user groups and reading books. And then I, you know, as .NET started to come out, I was really happy because VB or classic ASP was really limited. You could only do so many things. If you wanted more, you had to write a COM object,
hmm.
which was usually, you know, um, it was in VB6 or C++ or something. It was a lot of, it was like easy, 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 hard, you know. Um, and so we really, you know, when we started playing with .NET, it was like, whoa, you can like very easily kind of ramp up. And then also, it was really cool how web forms worked, where you could drag and drop things on and, you know, hook up events. So that was kind of a like natural progression from like, okay, I'm like writing tons of HTML and VB script. Now all of a sudden I can build these complex web forms and, you know, like, um, and so that was, I did that for some time, went through a couple of jobs and ended up at Vertigo Software.
Hmm.
And this, so, you know, I'd been learning .NET. I originally was like VB.NET and then picked up C Sharp. And then when I went to Vertigo Software, they were a Microsoft partner,
Oh,
and they also did some like Microsoft websites and stuff. So, and you know, this was like steps along the way. I actually worked for a period of time, but before I went to Vertigo, I worked with Phil Hack and his friend, and they started a small consulting company. This is before
ah,
MVC and all that. So,
yeah,
um, you know, but just different, like learning some .NET along the way, and then you know, of course, working at Vertigo as a Microsoft partner. Then I was going to conferences and really kind of
yeah.
learning stuff. Back,
Entrenched, you're really diving deep into the stuff then, yeah.
yep. And it's interesting looking at how the social networks emerged over time, because back then, you know, we didn't have like Twitter, and really a lot of the social networking was through blog comments. So I was constantly leaving comments on Phil Hack, Jeff Atwood, Rob Connery, like all our different blogs were like commenting back and forth to each
Yeah.
other. And so that's actually how I got the job. I left a financial company to work with Phil at his company, and then worked with other, you know, networking, leaving comments on Hanselman's blog, et cetera. And then that was part of how I got applied eventually, first to Vertigo, and then worked there a few years, and then at Microsoft.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, that was pretty neat. Yeah, I mean, I think that I remember those eras. Like when I was in high school, we were doing a lot of I was doing a lot of PHP websites. I was doing a lot of Gray Matter was the blog engine that I used at the time. Like WordPress was
Oh,
around
wow.
and things like that, but all the cool kids deployed their own PHP
Yep.
blog engines. And we were doing a lot of it was like blog networks. Do you remember that? Where it's like you would join
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I'm gonna create like I was really into South Park like as a kid.
Yep.
And there was this big like network of other South Park websites that would post different stuff, and like I would create these South Park websites, and I would in Photoshop like create things and do the stuff and come out with blogs and things like that. And then I got out of that era, and as I got a little bit older, I was like, oh, I'm just going to write a traditional blog about my life.
Yeah.
And these are things that you really can't find anymore, because they were like, I didn't even host my website. I was on a blog network because there's like like-minded individuals. Or I was like, oh, like I like your blog. Like, here's a little bit about me. Like I would love to create a blog as like your subdomain. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I would create these cool things. But it was like got blog networks. You're discovering each other through this because
Yeah.
again, I didn't even we didn't have I mean, I was in the era where Facebook, I think my college by the year I left was on Facebook. It was an era where like Facebook was letting in colleges still, but like,
Yeah.
we and there, in high school we had like MySpace or whatever, but I wasn't really active on MySpace. But like, those were those. But it was really like the blog networks that I was involved with around like these things that I was passionate about. It was either like TV shows or movies or video games or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, you kind of get it's just your local community, right? But just in this little space.
Yeah. And I miss that. Back then, the networks were very organic and grew out of like connections and different people like connecting their own blog to each other, and it didn't really matter where your blog was hosted, or if a lot of people self-hosted them or whatever, it's fine. um, and then over time we've moved to these like social networks, and I'm and then of course they're all slowly bought up by billionaires who are you know optimizing how their marketing and all that. And so I miss the like cool thing before. It was like where you just kind of discover people organically based on things. And yeah.
So when was it that you wrote some books
Oh yeah.
at some point? Was this like the moment that like, was this like your rise to stardom? Like, was it your jump? Was it vertical? Was it at Microsoft? Like, when was the rise of Jon Galloway? Because as people may not know, John has like about 500,000 followers on X. Is very popular. Hosts a weekly web stream with amazing individuals around the ASP.NET team called the ASP.NET Community Standup that he's done for about 15 years. And he's about to celebrate his 15th year anniversary at Microsoft at the end
Yeah.
of this month, which is very special. So one, congratulations.
Thank
And,
you.
and as it's been a journey. So it sounds like you came in, and was that your like rise? Did you ever think you'd be like public speaking and like
No.
doing community work, or like, like how did that emerge?
Yeah, so it slowly happened over time where I was learning. I was super excited about everything I was learning. I was reading all the blogs. So back then there was weblogs.asp.net was one of the big like blog rings, right? And it was hosted
Mm-hmm.
by Microsoft. But it was kind of uh, they weren't structured. It was just like community people and stuff. And so I was reading all the blogs, commenting on them, like all day. Like I used RSS Bandit, was a blog reader, written in .NET, and I was like going through and reading the source code and trying to write my own blog aggregator that did things exactly how I wanted. Um, and then eventually I pinged them and I like, hey, I'd like to get a blog on weblogs.asp.net. I forget, I had to like give some sort of justification, but they're like, sure, whatever. And so then I started blogging, and it was very much like every day as I'm learning stuff at work, it was like, write a blog post, write a blog post. And a lot of it too was then like pretty soon I'm like, regularly talking to like Jeff Atwood, Phil Hack, like some of these other people who are also kind of growing up through that same thing. As a result of that, we got offered a blog or a book deal, which was on I forget. It was actually web forms. It was ASP.NET web forms. So I wrote a book on that, and then there was the people jokingly call it the forehead book. It was the first like big rocks MVC book. There's MVC
Mm.
1.0. So I didn't write that. Phil Hack, Rob Connery, Scott Guthrie, and Scott Hanselman wrote that. But then when I started at Microsoft, they're like, hey, none of them wanted to write version two of it all that much. So I think, anyways, I took over as the lead author on that, and I did four versions of that.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and that, I was the lead author. I wasn't the only author, but that was a lot of work. And that was back when So back then, a version would come out every 2 or 3 years, and so you could actually have some time to write a book and publish it. When .net came out and started shipping, almost every year and then every year, it's really hard to write a blog or write a book, get it reviewed,
Yeah.
get it printed, and by the
Yeah.
time it comes out, the next version's out.
Yeah.
So, but and I've talked to other people who were doing books even before that were like C++ or something, and you could have a book that was valid for 5 years or more. It's like you could actually make a living as an author. Um, but it was mostly just something that I was, it was like I've always loved writing, and I had done a lot of writing on my blog. I slowly over time started a podcast up too, and so it's just like the books kind of fit in with all that stuff. That
Yeah.
was also part of the podcast. Actually, again, it was people that were like commenting on each other's blogs, and then Twitter came out, commenting back and forth. And then one time, K. Scott Allen accidentally called me on Skype, and I was like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing, but I guess this means we have to start a podcast." I'm like, "Okay, let's go." And so we got a couple. So that's how Herding Code started up. And we just our first one was like, I forget. We went through a few different iterations on the name. We would just record it on Skype and then publish it on SkyDrive. Like just
Yeah.
whatever. But yeah, so but
So
yeah, a lot of I think it's, and I'm sure your journey is similar, but it's the learning in community that's exciting, right? So
yeah.
it's like sharing what you're learning from other people, getting excited about the same things with each other. um and then like along the way it's like, hey, I could speak at the user group. Like this person spoke and they're okay, but I actually knew as much as they did. But why don't I volunteer? And then you do a
Yeah.
few of those, and then you know you see other people. You go to a conference or two, and then it's like, I guess I could apply. And
Yeah.
just give it a shot. So yeah,
It's sort of that slow evolution, right? I think
yeah,
that sometimes you go to a conference, you go to a user group, you see a video and you're like, oh, wow. Like, like, I don't know if I could ever do that. Like, there's this thing, like, I may know some stuff, but like, wow, like, seems so posh. But you remember that actually, if you go back, again, sometimes not even that long, like, if you go to, like the Dotnet YouTube, my YouTube, this podcast, you go back to the beginning, like it is dramatically different. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like Frank and I had a different vibe. Like the production level is different. The editing, the camera, like all this stuff, right? It evolves. It's just time, effort, and energy and practice at the end of the day. Like no one wakes up and is like, can just turn on and go and do a thing, right? It's a lot of practice that's there. And I think, we both work under Scott,
yeah,
and, sometimes Scott amazes me
yeah,
because I feel like Scott just knows everything and does everything. And it just like blows my mind. Like, how can someone have that knowledge? And it's not like he just woke up and he's like, oh, I know how to like, you know, turn my terminal into this pretty thing, and I'm using WSL.
right.
I'm doing these 5,000 things because he takes the time, effort, and energy. He's like learning these things. I don't know how he gets the time. Now that's a different question at the end of the day, but it is sort of that grind. So it's kind of cool to hear this gradual,
Hmm.
journey that you're on, and now. Our team is obviously very focused on community growth, and you've been doing obviously before our team formed, and
Yeah,
before that, it sounds like I don't know how long of your 15-year at Microsoft has been in the community space. I don't know if it's all of it or most of it, but
yeah.
it's I think it's evolved as well.
Just about all of it has been, and it's been watching those things grow while I've been here. Like, for
Mm.
instance, when I first started, open source was still kind of edgy inside of Microsoft, and uh, I don't know, like we've it's been cool working. I've worked close to Scott a lot of the time that I've been here, and a lot of that has been helping push on the same things, like,
Yeah.
hey, how can we how can we make .NET open source like a real thing, and make like both inside and outside of Microsoft, and how can we you know continue. So I started on Scott Hanselman's team. Then over a little bit of time I went over to DX, which was, I don't know, developer experience, but it was basically like a evangelism sort of job, and we also helped behind the scenes run the keynotes for like Build and
Yeah.
some of the other conferences. And so while I was doing that, I was helping to basically drive mostly the web portion of, like, say, a Build conference. So it started with, like, I would make a pitch. I would here's what we're doing this year, and here's what we want to say, and here's what's important to Scott Guthrie or whoever, and then help come up with like okay, I think what we could do is this is going to be an MVC website that uses Signalar and creates a animated GIF where you type your own caption on it, and that kind of stuff. And it's a meme generator with GIFs. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And we'd work with some consultants to help actually crank out the code for it, and then we would be like iterating it, doing these Scott Guthrie presentations. So I was a lot of time helping write the Hanselman part of the keynote, and then it was the Hanselman section of the big Scott Guthrie keynote, right? So then we'd have to do the reviews and get that all signed off, and then also have all the backups and backups for backups. So and then I did a stint as .NET Foundation executive director, which was it was a good thing to do for a period of time. I think it was working in community, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And then basically since then, I've been working with you, and this again, like back with Hanselman. I feel like it's the same sort of job in different iterations, and and
Yeah.
then Microsoft keeps learning and growing and stuff too.
And the landscape changes, and I think at its foundation is community, and like that's what our foundation of where I evolved from and where you evolved from is like our core. So John, I asked for 30 minutes of your time, and it's been 46 minutes. I will let you go back to your family. I appreciate your time and telling your story and sharing your journey. We do this on occasion. We often call it like a life and time of.
Nice.
We've done one with Frank. It's pretty cool. He's done some crazy stuff. This one I might call from Submarine officer to .NET developer, the life and time of Jon Galloway. So we'll see what the title shakes out when this one comes out. But John, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Jumping on at night, I literally just teams you and like, come on. So I apologize to your partner and to your family, but thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for the opportunity. It was fun.
Cool. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you like this podcast and this episode, feel free to like, subscribe, do all the things. Hop over to our YouTube at Merge Conflict FM on the YouTubes. That's where we read all the comments. We super appreciate it. And we're on our journey to 1,000 subscribers. So really appreciate it. If you like the show, share it with a friend. That's going to do it for this week's Merge Conflict Zone Textile. Yeah. Until next time, I'm James Montemagno. That's Jon Galloway. Thanks for watching and listening.